This is Claire Kim. I'm the director of Curatorial Strategy at the Here and There Collective. I'm here today with artist Lotus L Kang. Welcome, Lotus.
Thank you.
Today, I feel like is a very special conversation. I always feel especially lucky chatting with artists who I have a bit more history with instead of folks who I'm kind of meeting for the first time. It's just kind of like a different charge, I think, when I'm talking about their work, just because I think with you especially, we've worked together on my thesis exhibition in grad school. And so we've been in conversation for a few years now, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that we could chat maybe to start the conversation off with the work that we worked on together. You showed your installation piece, Mother. That was an ongoing piece and continues to be an ongoing piece. And I thought that there were a lot of harmonies with that particular piece that then kind of seeped its way into the installation that you have up right now at the Whitney Biennial.
So Mother is an ongoing body of work that I started in 2018, and it's comprised basically of industrially sized, mostly industrial size, sometimes domestic scale, but stainless steel mixing bowls. Filled with various materials, often with a kind of pigmented silicone or rubber base, and then there's often cast aluminum foods, cast aluminum non-food objects. There's often scraps, debris, things that are kind of like in my orbit in my studio that have either kind of been like collected or gathered over time that then find their way into these bowls. And they're often shown in clusters or what I call like spores. Mother in general is really thinking about the figure of the mother body, not necessarily fixed to gender or biology, but really about the numerous mother figures that may make a body or unmake a body over time. And it's also referring to the mother in terms of like a fermentation process. And I'm familiar with these bowls through, processes of making kimchi and other kind of Korean banchan, but they're also used very ubiquitously throughout kitchens and industrial kitchens all over. So it has both this high degree of specificity as well as this kind of non-specificity and ubiquitous quality. And then the contents inside are they range from feeling quite like maybe like tender or beautiful to some of them are more like visceral and guttural and maybe not appetizing in terms of what you might expect to be in them.
Obviously, I also kind of first recognized the stainless steel bowls just from growing up in a Korean household. But I think the more time I spent with the work, I was especially really drawn to what the work makes the viewer do and not do. And so there's a lot of, it's always shown kind of on the ground. And so folks have to either bend down, squat down, or peer over. And from the point of view of approaching the work, you can't really see what's going on. And so there's always this surprise element of not knowing what to expect. And I was thinking a lot about how you kind of push viewers to move their bodies in your more recent works at the Biennial as well. There are a lot of floor-based pieces that I felt like were quite new. And so I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about that.
But you're right in that I'm like really interested in, making a viewer not consciously but somatically aware of our horizontal existence in terms of cycles of life and death, sleep and regeneration, dreaming and what happens in dreams. Because I think about the floor as this in some ways, this endless horizon in which hierarchies are kind of flattened, and there isn't necessarily a clear linear direction or narrative. And also I think of the floor as both like a formal strategy with art making to kind of resist making things that feel more monumental, more kind of at a remove from the viewer. My interest is so much in materiality and form, so I want the materials and forms I work with to be able to like have a pretty like immediate affect and an immediate feeling with the viewer. I knew I wanted to make floor-bound sculptures. I was thinking about Mother, but I also really wanted to try something new. So I was, the way the tatami came in as this kind of sculptural base in which other materials are then arranged or like integrated with them is multifold. From a biographical perspective, my paternal grandmother, who I call seed woman or vessel woman in my head, who I didn't know very well because she died when I was really young, she fled North Korea and then eventually opened up a shop in Seoul for selling seeds and grains and beans. And it was like a really modest shop, but she had 7 kids that she had to feed on her own, essentially. So she apparently slept there. That's one of the, I have like a handful of stories that have been passed down to me about her. And that's one of these stories, is that she apparently slept at the shop. So I was like, a mattress is also a vessel. And I'm often thinking about how to bring in the body without having the body represented, because I think that the body is made more of what is around it than what it actually appears to be. And whether that state is dreaming, communing with others, love, death, rest, cellular regeneration or cellular death, all of that. So it started with that kind of history, but then, the mattress, the tatami, is this very like modular form. It has this inherent portability to it, and you can see that it can fold and unfold, and in the installation they're in various states of kind of sprawled out or kind of held back together. So it has this inherent sense of changeability to it, or a provisional kind of quality to it. And then of course, in not ever trying to represent identity as like one thing or one clear kind of legible form. Tatami, being originally Japanese technology, felt much more in line with thinking about how identity is never fixed or singular. And of course, Japan and Korea's history is very entangled and, is still playing out through like the neo-colony that South Korea is now.
Right. So food items obviously were a large part of the Mother piece and my introduction to your work, and thinking through the various kind of ways in which you're showing the food, mostly cast in aluminum, at least at the time. And then since then, there are still a lot of cast food items in Cascades, but there are also food items that are, I think, shared kind of in their regular form, wrapped in paper materials and things like that. Do you want to talk a little bit about like food in relationship to your practice?
Yeah. I guess when I started working with food, it wasn't really, like many of the things I work with, I'm not understanding quite why I'm doing it until a little bit after the fact, or when I'm deeper in the process. I often work with foods that are maybe distinctly more Korean, although it's not always the case. So it's a way to insert my body into the work, or as a kind of placeholder for my body, while also knowing that an anchovy, a cast anchovy, every Korean knows what it is right away, and then everybody else has a different experience of it. So again, it's like specific and non-specific, or it has this ability to be highly specific the way memory can be, but also very kind of like formless in general. But I guess with the food, I'm interested in how it represents a transformation to come. So they feel like these like latent objects to me, in that you know that is meant to be eaten, and then the body metabolizes it and transforms it, and then it contributes to the making and unmaking of a body over time. So it's and by casting them in aluminum, it's a way for me to like monumentalize this idea of a metabolization to come, or a breakdown to come, or a transformation to come.
Yeah, it's acts as this kind of invitation for like the opposite of perfection. I think it'd be a great kind of pivot to speak more specifically about the film in Cascades. Now you've shown, like you've said, this piece in various kind of stagings, and I was curious to hear a bit about what the things that you had learned kind of showcasing the work in different locations kind of ended up in this particular installation.
Yeah, I guess I would say that, leading up to when the work was first going to be shown, which was at Chisholm Hill Gallery in London, I knew that there was going to be film kind of suspended from some kind of ceiling horizontal scaffold that was not quite clear in my mind at that point. But the Chisholm Hill show was lining up with another kind of commission I did for MCA Chicago in the atrium, where I was also going to suspend film. And that kind of kicked me into high gear to like really start understanding the material more, at least an understanding including like archiving it and keep like creating a kind of like log of it, So I spent 2 years living nomadically. So it was a kind of like really wild way to think about making this the biggest kind of show I've ever worked on while I was moving around. And so I had, I think, 3 or 4 different studio spaces within the space of those 2 years. And, I started creating shorthand names for the kinds of films. So I started to categorize them. And that was the beginning of like a deeper kind of, not only understanding, but my own kind of a deeper intimacy between myself and the material. So I categorized them into, depending on their colors and what had happened to them when they were tanned or exposed, called blood, bruise, bile, and leak. And leak can be added to any of them because leak was, implying that there had been a leak in the greenhouse where they had been tanned. And so like the leaks, the water would like do stuff to the film. I had a second greenhouse go up in between Chisholm Hill and the Whitney Biennial. And so there were new sheets of film that were brought in that were tanned in a different greenhouse. And things I've learned, it really does depend on the light. A lot of people seem to think that, especially at the Whitney, for example, like you're not going to go back in August and see, there's not going to be a radical transformation in front of your eyes. And I'm actually not interested in that. I'm really not interested in like this evidence of change. My interest is in the reality that these are sensitive, slightly volatile materials just as we are, and that change happens over different durations. And this like this human-centric kind of desire to like have to prove something to be true if we can verify it by our sight. I'm really not interested in that. So I'm not like, oh, it's a mood ring and go watch it change. I'm kind of like, you are bearing witness to, and vice versa, this process that is in action, whether you can see that or not.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Of course. Thank you I'm so glad we find ways to like keep this conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely.